The thing about a chafed fuel line is you're supposed to spot it easy, that's the point. A rub mark against a bracket, a worn through spot in the insulation, a blue stain if she's been weeping, 20 years turning wrenches on turbines, and I've written up maybe 200 of them. Boring paperwork. The one I found that Tuesday morning wasn't chafe. It looked like chafe. We had 6 jets in the barn at that time, plus 2 King Airs and an old Beech I kept alive out of pride. The air park sits about 40 minutes north of San Antonio, private strip. One hangar with a corrugated roof that ticks and pops all day as the sun cooks it. September in Texas doesn't cool off. By 10 in the morning, inside that hangar, you're sweating through your shirt and the concrete floor gives you a headache from bending over. Everything smells like burnt Jet A and the pink hand cleaner Marla stocks in the bathroom. I was doing a 100-hour on the number 2 engine of a King Air 350. Owner's a guy out of Houston who runs it up here twice a month for a charter contract. Nice airplane. Well kept. Nothing on her should have surprised me. I had the cowl off, and I was tracing the fuel supply line from the firewall down to the FCU, running 2 fingers along the braid the way you do. You feel for heat marks, for wet spots. About halfway down, right where the line passes behind a P-clamp, my thumb caught on something that shouldn't have been there. A little raised ridge in the stainless braid, like it had been kinked and pushed back. I pulled the clamp. 15 minutes to get to the bolt, one hand upside down, forearm on hot metal. When the line came free in my hand, I sat down on the wheeled stool and just looked at it. My hands were still greasy. There was a strip of black tape peeling off the leg of the stool, and I stared at that instead of the line for a minute, then 2. The braid was intact. Perfect. But underneath, where the clamp had been hiding it, someone had opened the outer sleeve on a seam, cut into the inner tube on the diagonal about a 1/4 inch, and then laid the braid back down. You couldn't see it. You could only feel it if you knew what you were feeling for, and even then, only barely. I'm going to tell you what happens with a cut like that on a pressurized fuel line at cruise. Nothing for a while. Maybe an hour, maybe 3, the rubber is still holding, then the heat cycles do their work and the cut starts to weep, and once it weeps, it opens, and once it opens on a King Air that's out over the Gulf on the way to a client meeting in Louisiana, you have about 2 minutes of usable power on that side before your single engine, and about 10 minutes after that before your fuel imbalance means you're not making land. I sat on that stool for a long time. The hangar was quiet. The other guy who worked mornings, Cal, was outside on a smoke break. The office was empty except for Marla at the front desk playing solitaire on her computer. I could hear the fan of a compressor kicking on and off somewhere in the back. I told myself, very calmly, that I was reading it wrong, that maybe I did this, that maybe last Tuesday when I'd been in there for the fuel filter I'd nicked something and I just didn't remember. I put the line up on the bench under the lamp and looked at the cut with a loupe. It wasn't a nick, it was a cut, made with a small, very sharp blade, angled the right way, on a section that would sit behind a clamp under a cowl that only gets pulled every 100 hours. You have to understand something. To do this, you have to know the airplane. You have to know where the inspector's fingers won't go on a walk-around. You have to know that the P-clamp will hide the mark. You have to know the fuel pressure at cruise and how the rubber degrades. Whoever did this had done a 100-hour before. Maybe not on this airplane, but on this model with these hands. That's when the second thing hit me, and it hit worse than the first. I knew the schedule. Every airplane in that hangar has a whiteboard in the office with the next trip written on it. Sharpie. The King Air was going out at 6 the next morning. 1 pilot, 1 passenger. The passenger's name I'm not going to say. I'll tell you, he ran a mid-sized construction outfit out of the valley. He'd been in the local paper twice that summer for a lawsuit I didn't follow, and he used our field because his own strip down south was under repair. I'd met him twice. Wide guy, quiet, tipped the line boys in 20s. That was all I knew about him, and it's all I want to know. I put the cowl back on nothing. Nothing was closed up. I walked out of the hangar and around to the north side where the trash bins are, and I stood there and I tried to think. Cal came around the corner with his cigarette. "You all right, brother?" I said. The heat was getting to me. He said, "Drink water." He went back inside. Here is what I turned over. If I did nothing, the airplane flew, and somewhere over Lake Charles, the day went bad. If I fixed it and wrote it up honest, saying I'd found a cut inner tube on a fuel line, then the FAA and the sheriff and probably the FBI are in this hangar by lunchtime tomorrow, and every mechanic here, including me, becomes a suspect until they clear us. And the person who did it, if they're still working here, has a full night to know I found it and to do something else. I have kids. I have a wife who works nights at a hospital in New Braunfels. I own a house with 2 more years on it. I am not a hero. I want that on the record. I stood by the trash bins thinking about my truck payment, but I couldn't put that line back and close the cowl, so this is what I did. I went inside, I told Marla I needed the King Air pushed to the North Bay because I was pulling the fuel screens and I wanted better light. She didn't care. I got Cal to help with the tug. 10 minutes later, she was in her new spot and I had the whole hangar in my sightline and both doors. Then I did the repair. Clean. New line from stock, new clamps, new safety wire. I took my time and I did it the way I would have done it if I'd found real chafe. I wrote in the logbook, fuel supply line, engine 2, replaced due to internal defect discovered during 100-hour inspection. Part number, my stamp, date. I did not write the word cut. I did not write the word deliberate. I did not write anything about a blade. The old line I did not throw in the scrap bin. I put it in a Ziploc from Marla's snack drawer, and I put the Ziploc in my lunch cooler in the cab of my truck. That night, I got home late. My wife was already at work. The house was dark except for the light over the stove. The dog kept coming in from the back room and sitting by my chair and going back out. I sat at the kitchen table with a beer I did not drink, and I typed a letter on a laptop I only use for tax stuff. I did not sign it. I put in it the make and model of the airplane, the tail number, the date of the flight scheduled the next morning, the general nature of the damage, and a sentence saying whoever did it knew turbine engines and knew the maintenance schedule at a private field in South Texas. I said I was a mechanic. I said I had fixed the problem. I said the airplane was safe now. I said I was writing because I thought somebody ought to know. I printed the letter at the library on Wednesday during my lunch from a USB stick I threw into a storm drain on the way back. I mailed it from a mailbox in Seguin on Thursday with a stamp I bought with cash. I addressed it to a field office in Houston. I did not put a return. The King Air went out that Wednesday morning. My boss called me at 7:30 and told me the passenger had rescheduled, wanted a different tail number for a different day. No reason given. He asked me if I'd finished the 100-hour. I said, yeah, all good. One bad fuel line. Wrote it up. He said, good work. 2 weeks later, a man in khakis and a polo, not a suit, came through the hangar and asked to see the maintenance records on that King Air. He didn't say who he was. He looked at the logbook. He took a picture of the entry. He thanked us. He asked Cal a couple of questions about who had access to the hangar overnight. He didn't ask me anything. He left. I never heard anything else about it. The passenger flew out of our field twice more that fall, always on a different airplane. I did not work on those flights. I asked to be moved off his tail rotation, and my boss shrugged and moved me. I don't know if the man in the polo did anything with what I sent. I don't know if he even got the letter. I don't know who cut that line, and I have thought about it, and I have decided I do not want to know. If I knew, I would have to look at that person across the coffee pot in the morning, and I would have to decide again, every day, what to do about it. The old fuel line is still in the Ziploc. It is in a coffee can on a shelf in my garage behind a box of oil filters. Sometimes when I'm out there working on the mower, I look at the can, and I think about throwing it away, and I don't. That's the only part of this that still bothers me. Not the flight, not the letter, that coffee can. I fixed the airplane. I told somebody. I think both of those were the right thing. I am pretty sure they were. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Portage Park, and you could smell it from the stairwell before you even reached the door. September in Chicago, mid-70s, the building sitting in the sun all week. The landlord had called it in on a Tuesday. By the time the coroner cleared it and we got the job, it was Friday. My partner was Dev. He was still down at the truck laying out the ozone machine and the enzyme kits when I went up. He didn't like going in on the first walkthrough. He said I had a better nose for what we needed. I think really he just didn't like being alone in there. Not that I did either. It's a thing you carry around, walking into a place where somebody spent their last weeks by themselves. I unlocked the door with the key the property manager had left in a lockbox on the railing. Suited up in the hallway. Respirator, Tyvek, double gloves, blue booties. You get quick at it after enough houses. The tenant's name on the lease was Roland, 58, retired plumber. That's all I knew going in. You try not to know more than that at the start. It gets in the way. Living room first. He had died on the couch. That much had been obvious when the paramedics found him, and it was still obvious now, from the outline pressed into the cushions and the darker halo on the fabric. Late summer heat had done what it does. Flies were still going in the window frames. The TV was on when I walked in, muted, some daytime rerun. Nobody had thought to turn it off. I stood there a minute, just listening to the building, radiator ticking, somebody's dog downstairs, a bus hissing on Irving Park, normal city sounds, which is the strange part about these jobs. Everyone else's day keeps going. I started in the kitchen. That's the routine. Fridge, trash, anything organic first. His fridge had a carton of milk with a July date, a half-eaten sub in wax paper, 2 green peppers gone soft. I bagged it. On the counter, a coffee mug with a spoon still in it. The coffee dried down to a black ring. His pill bottles were lined up next to it. Blood pressure. Something for cholesterol. Nothing unusual. Bedroom was neat. Bed made. Slippers lined up. A book on the nightstand with a receipt for a bookmark. Page 84. That got me for a second. The receipt was from a Jewel Osco on Milwaukee. He'd bought bananas and a lottery ticket. Regular Wednesday errand. Then back to the living room. I moved the coffee table first, then started on the couch. That's when I found the diary. It was underneath, taped to the underside of the frame with clear packing tape, wrapped twice in a Ziploc freezer bag, then again in what looked like a vacuum-sealed food bag with the top folded and taped shut. Whoever did this did not want it found by accident, and did not want it damaged. I sat back on my heels. My first thought, honestly, was drugs. You find things taped up like this, and it's usually cash or narcotics, but it was too flat, too flexible. I cut the tape with my utility knife and slid it out, a composition notebook, black and white marbled, the kind kids use in school. His handwriting on the front in blue ballpoint. Just a date range. January 2019 through the current month. I should have called Dev right then. I should have put it in an evidence bag and stepped outside. But I opened it. The first pages were nothing. Weather. What he watched. A note about his brother's birthday. Prices at the grocery store. He wrote every day. Not much per entry. Sometimes just 2 lines, but every day. He had that discipline. Then in April of this year, the tone shifts. He starts noticing things. A neighbor asking too many questions in the mailroom. His mail arriving already opened, twice. A car parked across the street with someone sitting in it at odd hours. He writes it plain, no drama. Silver Malibu again. Same guy. He doesn't look at me, but he's here when I come out. That kind of thing. He never names the person. He uses him and the visitor a few times. In one entry from June, he writes, "I know why he comes. I won't put it here. If someone reads this, I want them to look, not to guess." That line stopped me. I flipped forward, skimming now. He described things in the apartment I hadn't noticed. He wrote about a scratch on the inside of the front door lock. Fresh, not mine. I got up, walked to the door, looked. It was there. A small bright scrape on the brass, right at the pin. Something I would have wiped away without a thought. He wrote about the window in the kitchen not latching right anymore, and how he'd wedged a spoon in the track because he didn't want to complain to the super and put his name in a work order. I went and looked. The spoon was there. He wrote about the smell of somebody else's cologne in his coat closet after he came home one Sunday in July. I opened the closet. It just smelled like the rest of the apartment now. But I believed him. The last entry was dated August 18th. He must have died within a day or two of that, based on the state of things. The entry was longer than the others. He wrote it like he was talking to a person, not to a page. He said he thought it would happen that week. He said he had left this notebook where it would be found by whoever cleaned up, because he figured the police would sweep once, see an old man on a couch, and go home. He was polite about it. He apologized for the mess. Then he wrote how he thought it would go. He said the man had a key by now. He was sure of it. He said it would look like a heart attack. He said to check the coffee, because that was the only thing he drank in the afternoon and the only thing he'd left out where somebody could get to it. He said to check the pill bottles, because 2 of them had been moved between Tuesday and Wednesday, and he hadn't touched them. He said to check under the cushion on the left side of the couch, because he'd found a button there that wasn't his. Plastic, dark brown, 4 holes. I looked at the couch. I hadn't lifted that cushion yet. I put the notebook down on the coffee table, on top of the plastic sheeting we'd laid. I did not lift the cushion. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the coffee mug on the counter with its dry black ring, and I did not touch it either. Then I went out to the hallway, and I called Dev and told him to stop unloading. I called the number for the detective, whose card was clipped to the job folder in my binder. I told her I had found something she needed to see, and that I was leaving everything the way it was. She asked if I was still in the unit. I said I was in the hall. "Go outside," she said. "Wait by your vehicle. Don't touch anything else." Dev was on the sidewalk when I came down. He had one hand on the ozone machine and the other on his phone. He looked at me and said, "What?" I said, "I don't know yet." We stood by the truck for maybe 40 minutes. It was a nice afternoon. Kids getting off the bus at the end of the block, a woman watering the planter boxes on her stoop across the street. I watched a silver sedan drive by twice while we waited, and I could not tell you if it was a Malibu or not. I wasn't going to be the guy who convinces himself of things. The detective came with 2 other people. They went up. They were up there a long time. Somebody else's van pulled up eventually, and the guys who got out of it were dressed for the same job as me, from a different company. Dev and I gave our statements on the curb and drove home with an empty truck. I want to be careful how I say the rest, because a lot of it is still not not public. The official cause of death on the first pass had been natural. Cardiac event, consistent with his age and history. Nobody had a reason to look harder. There was no forced entry. The apartment was tidy, his family was out of state and hadn't spoken to him in months, which is more common than you'd think. After the notebook, they went back. I don't know everything they found, but I know they took the coffee mug, and I know they took 2 of the pill bottles, and I know they took the couch. The button was there, under the left cushion, dark brown, 4 holes, plastic. It matched nothing in his wardrobe. The death got reclassified in November. It took another year after that before an arrest, and I only found out about it because the detective called me herself to tell me. I gave a deposition. I sat in a room with 2 lawyers and walked them through everything I saw in that unit, in order, without leaving anything out. They asked me twice why I opened the notebook instead of bagging it. I told them the truth, which is that I don't know. I haven't read the news on the case since. I know how it came out in the broad strokes, and that's enough for me. Somebody who had been in that man's life long enough to have a key. Somebody he trusted enough to let make coffee. That's as far as I want to go with it. I still do the work. Fires, mostly, and hoarding cases now. Dev and I are still partners. When the calls come in for unattended deaths, the ones where somebody was alone for a while, I pass them to another crew. My boss didn't ask why the first few times. After a while, he stopped offering. Roland comes back to me at odd hours. Not the couch, not the smell, the handwriting, how steady it was, all the way to the last page. How he wrote it for somebody like me and not for himself. He had time to be scared, and he used it to make a record instead. I don't know that I would have done the same. The notebook is an evidence. I never saw it again after that afternoon. I wouldn't want to. The work order came in around 2 in the afternoon, a reconnect out in a neighborhood off Nolensville Pike, May of 2020, so everything was still weird. Half the customers wouldn't open the door more than a crack, half of them treated you like the only human they'd seen in a month and tried to talk your ear off. You never knew which one you were getting until you knocked. I remember the address because the numbers were painted on the mailbox by hand, uneven, in that thick white paint people used to use for curbs. The house was a small brick ranch, 1-story, the kind you see all over the older parts of Nashville. Overgrown boxwoods along the porch, a push mower on its side in the yard like somebody had gotten halfway through and given up a week ago. The grass was up past my bootlaces. The old man opened the door before I finished knocking. He looked like he'd been standing there waiting. Late 70s, maybe 80. Tall but a little bent. Cardigan buttoned all the way up, even though it was pushing 80 degrees. Big glasses, the frame slightly crooked. He smiled at me, and it was a nice smile. That's what stuck with me later, honestly. It was a nice smile. "Come in, son." "Come in. The living room, that's where it needs to go." He had a slow, careful way of talking. Southern, but not thick. He said his name, and I said mine, and I forgot his by the time I'd walked back to the truck for my kit. That happens. You do 6, 8 jobs a day, names fall out. The living room was toward the back. Long hallway, carpet the color of oatmeal, walls a shade of yellow that used to be white. A grandfather clock ticking somewhere I couldn't see. It smelled like coffee and old paper and something else underneath, like the inside of a closet that hadn't been opened in a while. Not bad, just still. He'd already moved the TV out from the wall for me. That's rare. Most people, you show up and you're playing furniture Tetris for 15 minutes before you can even see the jack. He'd done it himself. He apologized about the dust and offered me a glass of water twice on the way down the hall. I got down on my knees behind the entertainment center and started working. Coke's was old, the fitting was corroded. I was going to have to trim it back and put a new end on. Nothing unusual. He stood in the doorway for a minute watching me, then said he'd let me work, and I heard him shuffle off toward the kitchen. That's when I looked up. The wall above the TV had photos on it. That's normal. Everybody's grandma has photos above the TV, except this wall had a lot of them. And then I turned my head, and the wall to my left had photos too, and the wall behind me. Not framed, most of them. Tacked up. Some in cheap drugstore frames, some in nicer ones, some just pinned to the drywall with a thumbtack in each corner. Big ones, little ones. Some faded almost pink from the sun. All of them were the same woman. I didn't clock it at first, because when you're on a job you're not really looking, you're just registering shapes. But I set down my crimper and I actually looked, and it was the same face. In one she was maybe 7, missing a front tooth, in a swimsuit at what looked like a public pool. In another she was a teenager, sitting on a curb somewhere, eating an ice cream. In another she was in her 20s at a bus stop, 30s, in a grocery store parking lot, unloading a cart. Older, in a park, wearing a coat. Older still, on a bench, reading. She had the same face in all of them, the same slightly crooked mouth. She looked like him. You could see it if you knew to look. I stood up. I don't know why I stood up. I think I wanted to see them from further away. the whole wall at once, like a mosaic. There were maybe 200 pictures in that room. I'm not exaggerating. I counted one wall later and got to 60-something before I gave up. And once you'd stood up and looked at them together, you noticed the other thing. She wasn't looking at the camera, she wasn't posing, not in any of them. In every single photo she was doing something ordinary, buying groceries, waiting for a light, sitting at an outdoor table with a coffee, walking a dog, and around her, in every frame, there were other people, blurry, out of focus. A guy behind her at the bus stop with no face, just a smear. 2 kids running past the pool, streaks of color. A woman at the next table over, turned into a soft brown shape. She was the only person in every photo who was sharp. I stood there for a second with my hands full of tools, and I could hear my own breathing over the clock in the hall. That was the first thing I registered, that I could hear my breathing. He came back with a glass of water and a paper napkin folded under it like it was a restaurant. He set it on the coffee table. "Are you doing all right down there, son?" I said yes, and I got back on my knees, and I finished the run. I did it fast, faster than I'd ever done that kind of job. My hands were fine. My hands weren't shaking or anything. I just wanted to be done. While I was tightening the fitting behind the TV, I kept flicking my eyes up at the wall closest to me. I started noticing other things. The photos weren't in order. A picture of her at maybe 40 was pinned next to a picture of her at 9, but the frames were grouped. All the ones from the same year had the same kind of frame, or the same kind of tack, or the same size. Like he'd done them in batches. Like every so often, he'd sit down and put up whatever he'd gotten that season. Some of the more recent ones had a different quality to them, grainier, longer lens maybe. In one of them, she was on what looked like a fire escape, and the angle was from below and pretty far away. She was drinking something out of a mug and looking at nothing in particular. I put the tools back in the bag. I tested the box, got a picture, showed him the guide. He nodded. He said, "That's fine. That's just fine. Thank you, son." He signed the tablet. His signature was very neat, very small. He wrote like someone who'd worked in an office his whole life. I should have left. I want to say that clearly, because I've thought about it a lot. I had the bag on my shoulder. I was in the hallway. He was walking me to the door and thanking me and offering me a bottle of water for the truck, and I was almost out. At the door, I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. I turned around and I said, "Sir, can I ask you something?" He said, "Of course." "The picture's in there, in the living room. Is that family?" He smiled again, that same nice smile. He looked back down the hallway toward the living room like he was checking on somebody, and then he looked at me, and the smile didn't go away, it just kind of settled. "That's my daughter." He said it warm, proud, actually. The way you'd say it if you were showing off a school photo on your phone. "She's beautiful," I said. I don't know why I said that either. She is. She doesn't know I took most of those. He said it the same way he'd offered me the water. Same tone. "She moved away 30 years ago this June." I nodded. I remember nodding. My hand was already on the doorknob. She didn't want me to know where she was. He said it like he was telling me the weather. He wasn't sad. He wasn't angry. He was just letting me know, the way he'd let me know the Cokes was old. I said thank you for the water. I don't think he'd actually given me the water. I said it anyway. I got out onto the porch, and the door closed behind me with a little click, and I walked to the truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time. I didn't start the engine. I had the door open and one foot still on the gravel, and I just sat there. It was warm out. There was a wind chime somewhere on the block, and a lawnmower 2 streets over, and a plane going into BNA, very slow, overhead. I thought about the picture of her on the fire escape, the angle it had been taken from, whether that was somebody's building or a hotel across the street. Whether he'd flown to wherever that was, or driven, or paid somebody, or just gotten lucky once and framed it. I thought about the fact that she had lived 30 years thinking she got away. There was a version of this where he was a lonely old man who missed his kids so much he'd spent his life making a shrine out of anything he could find. Old school photos, yearbook pages, newspaper clippings, a friend of a friend might have sent him over the years without knowing what it was really for. That version was possible. That version made sense with the cardigan and the folded napkin and the way he'd said, "son." There was another version. I didn't have to spell that one out. I sat there long enough that dispatch pinged me twice about the next job. I closed the door eventually. I drove. I never said anything to anyone at the company, because what would I have said? I didn't get her name. I didn't get his, not really. I could find the address if I wanted to. It's in the system somewhere. Somewhere in Nashville there's a woman in her 50s or 60s who thinks she pulled it off. I don't know if she did. I've picked up the phone a couple of times over the years. I put it back down. I keep telling myself I don't have enough, or that it's probably nothing. I don't know which of those is true, and I don't know which one I want to be true, and that's the part that stays with me.